All right, we're going to turn our attention back now to the election results. New Jersey's race for governor topping the ticket. Mikey Sherrill beating Jack Ciattarelli by 13 percentage points. But what does this mean for South Jersey and some of the other statewide races and local races that we were watching? Joining us now is Alyssa Maurice. She is the assistant director of the William J. Hughes Center for Public Policy at Stockton University. Good morning, Alyssa.
Good morning.
All right. It just seems like a few minutes ago we were talking to you last night before the polls had closed. So let's get your reaction to last night's results in the New Jersey's race for governor and what the key trends are and takeaways.
Yeah, well, going into the race, a lot of the dynamics really favored Sherrill, and Ciattarelli really had an uphill climb to success here. So there were three key things that he needed to do. He needed to press turnout. Something that Democrats have experienced in recent cycles is lower turnout in the urban centers throughout the state, which are really Democratic strongholds. But when there's low turnout, it diminishes the impact of those winning margins there. And he did not get that. Turnout was extremely strong. He also needed to maintain the support that he had in 2021 against Murphy among moderate voters in affluent parts of the state, more traditionally Republican areas. And he did not get that. These areas tend to be a little hostile towards Trump. They were willing to vote for Ciattarelli in 2021. They did not vote for Trump in the same numbers. And it seems that, Ciattarelli was not able to maintain that support. And then he also needed to widen his coalition even more because he was facing a structural deficit. There are, much more Democratic voters in the state than Republicans. So he needed to widen his tent. He needed to bring in more of the Trump base, and he needed to continue the successes that Trump saw in 2024 among non-white voters, Hispanic communities. He did not get that either. They swung right back to Democrats in this election. So, it was a tough night for Ciattarelli's campaign.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, what does the Republican Party do to sort of regroup and move forward? Because it feels like we know there are still millions of Republicans in the state of New Jersey, but it feels like they all just kind of stayed home. They said, we're not going to come out. We're not motivated. So what does the next statewide Republican candidate have to do to motivate the base?
Yeah, I really think, I'm not sure there's much that he could have changed. I think the national headwinds were just too strong here. Trump is not popular in the state. The president is, underwater here in New Jersey. People are not happy with the economy either. We know that a lot of the swings that we saw last fall for Trump, particularly in those working class communities, they were about the economy. And, there were questions over whether Republicans could maintain that trend, without Trump on the ballot. But I think it's clear from the results tonight that those votes were about the economy. And we know that voters in New Jersey are still not happy with the current state of the economy and the cost of living. And, I think Sherrill clearly successfully tied a lot of that to Trump and Republican leadership at the national level. So those were really strong headwinds that a Republican was going into in this election cycle. And also, I think, it was a tall task for him to widen his coalition here in the state. It's a delicate balance to try to maintain those moderate Republicans and also bring in the MAGA Republicans and the Trump base. And that is the line he was trying to walk through this campaign. That's a big gamble, and I think everyone was waiting to see if it was going to be possible. But that's a really tough task for any Republican to do.
Alyssa, just one other question here. You talk about how the national narrative is what influences race, but people are not happy with the economy. That's a state issue where the Democrats have control of the governor's office, the legislature. They have control of the state Senate. And typically, as trends go, no matter what the national look is, it swings back and forth. And we've had 8 years of Democratic control in the governor's office, longer than that in the legislature, and it didn't swing back. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up because one of the patterns that a lot of folks have been talking about in this election cycle is that New Jerseyans have this trend where they tend not to vote for the same party for a third consecutive term. But I think another historical trend that was often overlooked is that New Jersey voters also tend to vote in opposition to the party that's in the White House. And that opposition party tends to see a turnout boost. And so I think those are the dynamics we were really working with last night. It was clearly an election where the opposition was coming out in full force to the party in the White House. I think that's something that was a bit overlooked going into this. And then on the economy, I think that's really the framing that was the competing framing in this campaign, right? So Cheryl was tying the economic issues to tariffs coming out of the Trump administration, to funding cuts and freezes coming down from the federal administration. The suspension of the Gateway Tunnel was certainly a gift for her and helped her campaign. And then Citarelli really was trying to tie it to Murphy and Democratic leadership at the state level, particularly on energy policy. And I think we've seen that Trump is just much more divisive than Murphy, and that framing of trying to connect it to Murphy just didn't succeed.
Alyssa, we got a hard out, so we got to stop you. But thank you very much, Assistant Director of the William J. Hughes Center for Public Policy at Stockton University. We appreciate you coming on.